Welcome to This Is My Story, a podcast dedicated to sharing your story and how God has helped you take next steps in your journey of faith. Before we get into today's story, we want to give you a quick heads up that today's story is about mental health. If talking about depression can be a trigger for you, we encourage you to skip to the halfway mark of this episode. We don't want you to miss the encouraging parts of this story. If you struggle with any of these topics, head to victorychurch.org and click on our resources tab. You can also check in our show notes and you can see that same link there. Now, let's jump into today's story. Well, welcome everybody. Today I am here with a very special guest with This Is My Story, Laura Givler. We are so excited to just hear her story today. If you've been listening to other episodes, just the incredible stories that people have been sharing, what God's done in their life and just what he's brought people through. Today I have Laura who's going to be sharing about her past with anxiety and depression and mental health. It's such a relevant topic that so many people, especially over the last 3 years, have really just fallen into that state of mind. And just that's where we've been kind of as a culture. So it's going to be an incredible time just talking with Laura of how the Lord has worked in her life and just ways that she's been able to overcome some of those thoughts and some of those fears that she's had. So Laura, welcome to the show. We are so excited to have you.
Thank you for having me.
Yes, we are so excited to have you with us today and just hear your story and just what the Lord's been doing in your life. And obviously mental health doesn't end. Like that's something that people aren't like, yeah, I had anxiety and now I'm never anxious about anything.
Right.
Like that's a process. Like it's something that we all struggle with. But your story is just one of how the Lord has brought you from just such crippling fear of that. So we're super excited to just unpack that with you today and just hear some of that story. So tell me how that kind of started. So what I know is that you struggled with it at a young age. So what was that like?
Yeah, so I was raised in the church. Parents were very young Christians, so it was more based on like religion than it was relationship pretty much up until my mid-20s, but I did not have a good relationship with my dad as a kid. And so from that, there was a lot of insecurities that developed.
Yeah.
So then going into school, thinking that I needed like approval from like other people, that's where like depression really started to become part of my life because I just went through school thinking like I wasn't good enough and like every aspect of my life, friendships, grades, sports, things like that.
Yeah.
And just really struggled with my self-worth because
absolutely.
I didn't feel like I had any.
Yeah.
So
was your dad in the picture or was it just, he was in the picture and there wasn't a relationship or was he completely out of the picture?
Yeah. So my dad was in the picture. He was not very emotional. So when it came to having a relationship with him, it was pretty much non-existent.
Yeah.
Growing up, he was very verbally and emotionally abusive to both my mom and I. And so, that stemmed like a lot of the things that I struggled with.
Yeah. So was that something was there a time in your life you remember as a child before any of that where you had a joyful or just a healthy childhood in that regard? Or was it, as far as you can remember, that was kind of the nature of your childhood? Yeah,
I actually don't remember much of my childhood. I think just from all the trauma.
Yeah.
It's pretty much like a black space.
Yeah. Wow.
Which makes me sad when I think about it now because it shouldn't be that way.
Yeah.
But yeah, I don't really remember much of my childhood because I feel like a lot of it was rooted in like my dad's temper.
Yeah.
And things like that. So
what was school like then for you? So home life wasn't great with this relationship. What was your school life like?
So school was hard for me. I struggled with ADD. I was not officially diagnosed with it though until I was in 8th grade. So going through elementary school and middle school and having this learning disability and not realizing that's what I had, you start to feel like there's something wrong with you. Like, well, I'm stupid. Why am I not getting this? So that in turn added to the depression that I was experiencing. And then like, most kids, when they start to not feel good enough, they're like, well, what can I change about myself physically? So then I started to struggle with an eating disorder, became just very focused on like the physical aspect of everything. And when you don't feel like you can measure up, because you really never can when you're constantly comparing yourself.
Yeah.
It just adds to everything that you're already feeling. So
at this point, you said your family was very into religion, but not really relationship with the Lord. Did you have any spiritual figures kind of speaking into you, or mentors, or you were kind of just on your own dealing with these thoughts and these things at such a young age?
Yeah, I was not a fan of church because of how my dad was. And then like church that we did go to, there were a lot of hypocrites. I saw a lot of things that I just didn't like. So I really didn't want anything to do with the church at that point in my life. So I didn't really have any influences other than my family.
Yeah. So you have this time of just anxiety and depression and sounds like no identity of who you are. You start going into these eating disorders that you have then, and had this really bad spout of anxiety and depression in the 2017, 2018 time period. What was that like, hitting such a low point in your life? At this point, I know you grew up, again, hearing things about church and being at the church. Was there any sort of silver lining or spiritualness that helped you through this? Or was this just a complete dark time of your life?
Yeah, so I actually went to Living Word Academy for high school, which is now Lancaster County Christian, I think. And I started to get a little bit more of a real view of what it meant to be a Christian there. I did have one friend that I was really close with. She was really the first example that I had in my life of what a true Christian was. She knew all the things I struggled with, never judged me, was just always there for me. And then when I graduated from high school, I just kind of fell back into past habits and just couldn't get my feet grounded in anything solid when it came to church, because I was missing still the relational aspect of being a Christian.
Yeah.
Because I hadn't really been showed that or like taught that, like, what does that mean to actually have a relationship with Christ and to find peace in him and rest and to like really truly feel loved and accepted by him. So in 2012, actually, I came out of a really toxic relationship. That's another story. But from that, I knew that I needed to change my life because if I didn't, I was going to end up taking my life. And that's actually what brought me to Victory my first time around. So July 2012 was when I got baptized and rededicated my life to Christ. And that was a huge turning point for me. I saw Jesus in his truest form for the first time in my life.
Wow.
Yeah. And it's still like, when I think about it, it's still like the best moment that I ever experienced. But yeah, and from that moment, I was like, I had this mentality that, okay, like now I'm going to church. I'm like grounded. I'm getting involved. Like I have this church family around me that's supporting me. So depression and anxiety and all this stuff is no longer going to be an issue. Because that's what I was led to believe in the past, that, when you're a Christian, all you have to do is pray it away.
It magically goes away.
Yeah. It just goes away. And that was not the case, obviously.
Yeah.
And then some things happened and I ended up not backsliding, but taking a step away from Victory and just kind of floated around for a little bit. And then that brings me to 2017, 2018, when I fell into a really deep depression.
Wow. So you just 6 years prior, have this life-changing moment and rededicating your life to the Lord. And just where did that kind of confusion come in then? Like, where did you see a point where you were like, wow, I'm really leaving this? Or was that something you were like, you know what, I did experience this, but I want to start moving? Was it kind of a slow fade, or was it something that was kind of a decision you made of, hey, let me start living this way again?
Yeah. So I, like I said, I have never experienced anxiety to the extent that I did during this time period. And it was really frustrating for me because I'm like, I don't understand.
Yeah.
Like, why am I going through this after like I've already, given my life to Christ and, all these things. I just felt like everything was being taken away from me and like I was being isolated. And I got really angry at God and I didn't understand. I'm like, what is my purpose for even living? And I remember praying like, Lord, like if this is what my life is going to be like and I'm going to struggle with this, like just take my life because I don't want to live like this. And I ended up listening to a message from another pastor friend of the family, and he was talking about mental health. And I know this is not the case for everybody, but it's something that I've learned to see. And he was talking about how a lot of times the enemy uses mental health as a stronghold in your life.
Yeah.
Because he wants to isolate you, because he knows that if he can isolate you, then he can keep you from being used in the kingdom. And something in that message just snapped inside of me. And that's when I felt for the first time that I was actually fighting back against the enemy, not just like a stigmatism that, culture puts out, but actually fighting against an enemy that's trying to take my life from me, and not blaming God.
Yep.
And seeing like where God was at actually in all of that, protecting me and keeping me safe, because there were so many times where I wanted to end my life, but something in me was like preventing me from doing that. And had I not, and I believe it was the Holy Spirit, and had I not had that, I probably would not be here today sharing this with you. So
you hear this message, you kind of have this perspective shift. What next steps did you take then? So like you have this revelation of that, of like, there is an enemy out here trying to get me. And like you said, this isn't God trying to punish me. This is an attack. What next steps do you take after you have that perspective change?
Yeah. So funny thing. So that happened in 2018. So then I was like, okay, I need to find another home. I need to find a home church again. I can't not be a part of a community of people. So I started that process, and I jumped around a little bit, and then I got discouraged because I felt like I wasn't finding the right fit, And then I did church online for a little bit, and over, those 2 years, like I said, it was a process.
Yeah.
And then I finally was like, you know what? I just really need to take this seriously. And then COVID hit.
Yeah.
And so I was like, oh, well, I guess I'm not going to be going to church for a while. But COVID was actually such a blessing for me because, and I almost feel bad saying that because I know it was a really horrible time for a lot of people.
I hear what you're saying, because I've heard that story a lot from people, is as sad and horrible as it was for so many people. For a lot of people, though, it also just caused them to slow down, and it caused just people to kind of change perspective and change their mentality of going into things, like what really does matter and what's actually important in this time. So there's two sides of that coin for COVID, of people who will be like, yeah, it was this horrific time, and yes, it was. But then you have those other people who it just forced into a slowness that they may have never experienced in life, and just caused that to change perspective. So no, I understand what you're saying in that, because my story is a little similar, where so much was going on in my wife's life and in my life, and we were almost even crossing paths in many ways, and we're like, yep, this is where we're going, this is this, and that caused us to stop and be like, oh no, like now we're together, and now we can really see like this is a connection we're missing. Really spending this intentional time together. So no, I hear exactly what you're saying. So COVID happens, you're like, I'm gonna get back in church. It changes, obviously, for you. So what happens then?
So eventually things started to open up, and I was like, okay, started to dabble places here and there. Was going to one church for a little bit that my sister goes to. And then I still wasn't feeling connected. And I was still having those moments of not so much the depression wasn't really an issue for me anymore at that point. But anxiety was still very prevalent in my life. I can remember there was one time I went to the grocery store, and I literally just had to leave my cart in the middle of the aisle because I was having a panic attack for no apparent reason. I couldn't go out to eat at restaurants. It was hard. And then like when you're going through something and you're like, well, remember when this happened? You just have to like keep reminding yourself, no, God spoke this over me. Like I'm free of this. This is a stronghold. Like Satan is trying to keep me isolated, and I just need to like push through that. And it's such a mental thing, but it's also very spiritual.
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
I mean, I did do counseling for like a little bit, and I don't ever want to like tell people that, don't do counseling, or, some people do need medication. But I learned most times than not, it is like a spiritual thing. And it's a process. But then I found myself back at Victory. And I mean, I still have moments of anxiety, but they don't consume me or control me like they used to.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. And like you're saying, like, there's this just thought about counseling where many people are like, oh, no, like nope, can't do that. Like, this is all just, I have to give it to the Lord and that's it. Like, yes, give it to the Lord, but sometimes that's a path that we need to go down is just talking things through with somebody who's trained professionally to help you talk through some of those things. And like, I know that there's so many great Christian counselors out there and organizations that are there to just support you and not just talk you through the things, but also give you the biblical truths. Like you're saying, we need to be speaking over ourselves because it is a thing that's mental and it's spiritual at the same time.
Yeah.
No, that's such an incredible story. And what was it like then? 2020, obviously everything shuts down. You come back. Somebody with anxiety, what was it like then trying to physically reconnect with people then at that point? So churches are coming back together.
Yeah.
Was there any anxiety around that? Or was that more freeing and liberating to be able to then come back to people?
Yeah, well, it's actually funny because I'm an introvert. So like most people are like, yeah, like 2020, I don't have to talk to anybody, it's like, this is great. But because of like where I was at, I was like, no, like I want to be around people.
Yeah.
So I was like antsy. And like, as soon as things like started opening up, I like couldn't wait to just connect with people.
Yeah.
Like I was craving it. And I knew that was the Lord because that's not my natural response to people.
Yeah.
I mean, I love people, but I definitely take more of an introverted approach to things, but I was ready to go. I wanted to get involved, and I just,
So speaking to somebody who might be struggling with anxiety, depression, obviously the Bible is a great resource.
Yeah.
What are some other resources you may have looked into or used that have helped you along that journey, including the Bible, but in addition to that, what are some things that you might recommend that had helped you throughout that process?
Yeah. Being vulnerable and just telling people.
Yeah.
I think there's such a huge stigmatism around mental health, and people think, oh, you have mental health, you're crazy, or there's something wrong with you. And even like now that it's being talked about more, I still feel like there's still like people don't take it seriously.
Yeah, there's a perception of it. Yeah.
Yeah. And people are like afraid to talk about it, or they like take those labels and they carry them and they're like, this is part of my identity. And so like the one thing that I would just really encourage, and I think one of the PC or somebody spoke about this a couple weeks ago, that it's anxiety and it's depression, but it's not your anxiety.
Yeah.
It's not your depression. Like those things are not your identity. Those are things that the enemy is using, but they're not your identity. So I just would really encourage people that are struggling with anything in the mental health spectrum.
Yeah.
Don't claim it as it's part of you, but it's not who you are. And it's not where God can take you.
That's so good.
So yeah, that's probably the biggest thing, because it's a mental shift. And like, if you can get your mind to just shift away from like claiming those things as identifying you, it makes a huge difference.
Yeah. So like Laura's saying, like find people, find a group, find somebody, multiple people, I would even say, that can just pour into your life, speak into you, and just continue to encourage you in those biblical truths, that you are so much more than the things you're battling with and the mental state that you might be in. No, that's awesome. Thank you so much for sharing that, Laura.
Yeah.
Is there anything else that you want to share with our listeners, like that the Lord has done in your life within this area of depression, anxiety? What are you up to now? Like, what are your next steps? Obviously you're here recording this podcast and sharing your testimony about it. What are some next steps and things that the Lord's doing in your life right now?
Yeah. Well, I just want to encourage people that there is hope.
Yeah.
And if you are in a place where you're just feeling empty and hopeless, and like God's not ever going to fill that void, or you're always going to be isolated and you're always going to be alone. That is a lie from the enemy. It's totally not true. But you do have to take the steps yourself. God's not just going to do it without your input. Like you have to make the steps for the change, and you have to fight for it. So
that's good. He has the path already for you, but you have to be the one willing to take those steps and make that change in your own life. So, no, that's so good.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Laura, for sharing with us today. We pray that somebody listening to this today that might be struggling with anxiety, depression, fear, whatever that is, that this speaks to you. And just know, like Laura said, like there is a better path. Take those steps, connect with somebody, talk to somebody about this. But we love you guys. Thank you for listening. Tune in next week. We'll have another episode next Monday. Thank you for listening, and be blessed. Thank you, Laura, for being here.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us on this episode of This Is My Story. Hearing these incredible accounts of God's work in our lives reminds us of the enduring power of faith. If you've been moved by these stories, don't forget to subscribe on your preferred podcast platform and on YouTube. And don't forget to share the inspiration with others who might need it. This Is My Story is recorded at Victory Church in the heart of Lancaster County, Pennsylvania. You can learn more about This Is My Story and Victory Church in the show notes. Thank you for listening, and be blessed.